And
You're breaking up.
I couldn't hear. I'll be there all day, every 20 minutes, talking to young people for the youth council. So there's been very good enthusiasm to apply. Then at the end of the month, we'll have completed and selected the people. Uh-oh. All right, let's try. Can you hear me now?
You're a little broken up, but it's working.
Okay, then I'll make this short. The other thing that I wanted to clear up was a good bit of confusion as to what the council's direction had been as it related to the issues added to the DEI task force original charge. And then there was a drawback of a new charge that we were going to give to them, which was police accountability. That went to a few days later, went back to the council as a major initiative that would be on the council's desk. I try to get that completed within the 120 days. So people wondered what was going on there, and it was simply that the DEI task force is made up of a variety of people and are well suited for the original charges of the DEI task force, which included appointments to boards and commissions and included the hiring and retention of employees of the city, and finally making it a better place for everyone. And then the police, as I say, is going to be a specialized subject matter that we'll take up, and that will start fairly soon. So the long and the short of it is there's plenty to do for everybody. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I do know that lots of people were thinking there was something very odd about the fact that it had, for a few days, gone over to the task force and then came back to the council. In no way should you see any great meaning to that, but a divvying up of responsibilities.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions, guys? All right. Question?
I had a question, Jeff. This is Randy Arthur. I was waving my hand.
Go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a question, perhaps for you, the chair, or Councilor Kohlhoff. I was thinking back to the memo the DRC drafted with staff's help and sent to the city council regarding tree-related issues. And I just wondered if we had had any response or acknowledgement from the city council to that memo from the DRC regarding trees.
That's a pretty simple answer. No. That's a highly political issue that doesn't appear to be going anywhere with this particular council.
Okay.
I can add to that. I sent the memo to the city manager in March, which was right before the whole COVID crisis took place. So it was probably not great timing. But I did forward it to Martha, to the council. And, you know, when I didn't hear back, I didn't press on it, certainly because of what the council was dealing with at the time. But it's funny you should ask about that, because Councilor Lamont just emailed me this morning asking about that. And I reminded him that we did send the memo back in March, but we hadn't heard back from the city council about it.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to follow up.
The only thing that I would add to that is that we've already had our going back over the goals for the rest of the year, given that we did have the COVID that took up so much time, and possibly it's going to take up so much time going forward. But wholly aside from that, we've gone back over the goals and eliminated and trimmed down to what we think we can accomplish the rest of the year. And the trees were not on that.
Okay. I have a quick question. I know we got a lot to do tonight, but my understanding is there's $2.45 billion the state got from the federal government for COVID-related activities that can be used for schools, police, cities, hospitals. And I just wondered if we had applied for that, any of that. Theresa, you there? Okay. Well, we may have lost her. Can
Jeff,
you guys
I
hear me?
can't hear you at all. Jeff, I have no information on that, and I can't hear you at all. That was completely broken up. But if you would send me an email, I'll follow up and find out.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? All right.
Yeah, but the quality is definitely not as good as last meeting.
Correct. Okay. So shall we, let's move on to the next roll of business, which is the public, we're going to go back and open LU 190041, a request for the following: a lot line adjustment, an RP district delineation, a development review permit to construct 160 unit multifamily housing, approval of a parking study for shared parking, an unavoidable utility crossing for a stormwater facility, minor variances to retaining wall standards, and removal of 112 trees. The site is located at 5600 Meadows Road, 21E07BA00900. The staff coordinator is Johanna Hastay. We're continuing the hearing. We all got written information. And I guess at this point, we would ask if the counselors have questions of staff or Evan or somebody else before we move to deliberations.
Well, does Johanna want to kind of summarize what information came in? And then I have a short statement before you move to deliberation.
Okay.
I didn't prepare anything really. I have a slide that shows the condition 3, A3, the changes, but I think it's actually pretty clear. We're just updating the reference exhibits to include the 2 new E exhibits, and we're getting rid of A3D, which is for the lighting memo that I asked for because they had already submitted that. I had just missed it when I was putting the report together. So really, other than that, I think the memo that I sent you last Thursday demonstrated that really no new evidence had been submitted from the public, and the applicant responded to the calls for a revised site plan that would save more trees. Staff concurred with their findings that what was presented didn't constitute a reasonable alternative. But again, I think the memo listed all of the issues and the responses and staff's findings pretty clearly. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I don't really have anything more than that.
Okay, thank you. Guys, we'll go around and see if there's any questions, but first, I want to ask all of you, you did receive the memo?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. Kurt, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Jason, do you have any questions of staff?
No questions from me.
Randy, any questions?
Well, I did write down a few notes. I do have a few questions. I don't want to take up a lot of time though, but would you like me to ask some of them now?
Well, if it's going to affect the deliberations, yeah, I'd like you to ask them all if you think they're important.
Well, I'm looking at my phone where I'm keeping notes, which is very much unlike me if you knew me. So I noted there were public comments expressing concern about the potential impact of this development on the Carter Creek RP district. And in the July 1, 2020 staff memo, there's reference that the certain RP district protected riparian area buffer averaging or reduction options that the applicant was aware of, the applicant elected not to pursue. And these, according to the memo, would have authorized more intrusive encroachment into the Carter Creek natural area. And this was discussed at our last meeting. And I just wondered if the staff could briefly review and summarize what those encroachment options are that the applicant elected not to take advantage of, just for my own refresher and just to summarize them for the public who might be listening.
So Commissioner Arthur, that was never explored in any sort of detail with the applicant, any sort of buffer averaging where you can reduce a portion of the protected riparian area as long as you increase it in some other location and it averages out to the 50-foot average. They were aware that that existed in the sensitive land standard, but they never delved into it at all. They maintained the 50-foot buffer. So as far as any sort of details on plans from the applicant, I don't have any. They did pull the stormwater out of the Carter Creek protected riparian area. That was originally a stormwater outfall was originally planned there, but they shifted it over to the Meadow Creek, and that's the only impact.
And I noted there was a lot of, or there was some comment in the materials from last meeting, citizens and others commenting that the applicant had was to be congratulated for retaining the 50-foot buffer from the RP district, if I'm recalling that correctly.
Correct.
On the issue of traffic, which was discussed by some of the commissioners at our last hearing, I saw that in the July 1 memo, the staff noted the applicant has a vested number of trips as outlined in the adopted development agreement that had been referred to. And therefore, a new traffic impact study for this specific application is not required. I did see a letter from a citizen in the Waluga Neighborhood Association in which the author expressed her overall concern about general traffic impacts in this general area as a result of collective new development projects in the general area. And she offered her view that it would be appropriate for the DRC to recommend to the City Council that the LO professional staff now study and perhaps work on coming up with traffic. I'm sorry, I'm hearing background noise. Professional staff study and create meaningful plans to mitigate reasonably predictable traffic impacts and appropriate responses as these and other similar type land use applications may be approved and construction may be completed going forward. So I wanted to ask whether you were aware of, and if you could summarize the active steps the city is now undertaking to generally study and remediate traffic impacts of overall development in these general areas, and would any type of recommendation from the DRC regarding future traffic considerations be useful at this time?
Honestly, I'm going to have either Jessica Namanaloo or Erica Rooney or Will Farley speak to that. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Shorenstein project, which didn't require a traffic study.
I saw that.
I can't really talk about a general overall traffic study for the entire area, but there might be someone else who's participating tonight that can speak to that.
Well, I think there was some comment that it had been generally referred to the Planning Commission, but was not a high priority item. And I just wondered if any attention by the DRC, to the extent we had any concern about the overall impact of recent residential development in the area, whether a memo from the DRC might be of any use.
Well, I think like your memo to the City Council about trees, you definitely could put together a memo to the Planning Commission or the City Council about a traffic study for that area for public comment.
Yeah. I just wanted to raise the issue to see if there was any other thoughts on it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
As Johanna has indicated, the role of the DRC, of course, is to apply the standards and criteria to the development application. And that is to look to the traffic generated by the specific development. Anybody and any commission can make a recommendation to the city council or the planning commission on anything, outside your jurisdiction. Those would be the appropriate bodies to determine whether or not additional traffic general mitigation should be occurred, like citywide or region-wide, or like for a neighborhood. But it's not within the scope of the application or the DRC's review for standards and criteria of this application.
Okay.
I was just trying to respond to this letter by the former chair of the Waluga Neighborhood Association, raising some of those points. And I agree that it's my general understanding a commission can make recommendations if it so chooses at any time. And it is not required, as I understand it, that a new traffic study be done on this particular application. Chair, did you want to comment further?
Well, I mean, we talked about the last meeting, maybe putting together a letter talking about the traffic issues for Lake Grove in a holistic manner, and maybe we can get that on the agenda and get it, ask someone to write a draft, and we can look at it and get it kicked off the line. But for tonight, I think we that's beyond what we're going to consider.
I agree. Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I just had a general question, another general question. I saw that there was a letter from the Waluga Neighborhood Association in which they did not take a position on this application. And I believe the property that's the subject of this application is within the Waluga Neighborhood Association.
Actually, it's not. It's in Lake Forest.
Oh, it's in Lake Forest. Okay. Well, my question still is, because I saw the letter from Lake Forest Neighborhood Association, or the memo opposing the application, is as commissioners, are we to give greater weight to the neighborhood association's recommendation in which the application is situated, or is each neighborhood association recommendation, are we to give equal weight to any and all of them, irrespective of where the application is located?
Mr. Chair, if I can answer that one.
Evan?
You don't, yeah, you wouldn't give greater weight or less weight to any particular neighborhood association. The question is, what is the evidence before you relative to the standards and criteria? If a neighborhood association across the lake provides evidence to that standards and criteria, you would consider that just as you would consider it as if it was the same, if the neighborhood in which development is or adjacent to it. So it's the weight of the evidence, not who's giving the evidence.
Thank you. And I noted with interest the letter by the applicant's land use lawyer, Dana Krozak, I believe is how to pronounce it, in which she discussed the applicant's position that the applicant is in full compliance with the city's tree code as applies to this development proposal. I also, as noted, saw the memo by the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association Board expressing opposition to the application, and the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association in the memo opined that the applicant had not met its burden of proof for removal of the proposed trees.
Randy?
Yeah.
I asked that question of staff today, and it was my understanding what the answer was, and let me read it. Written testimony, as far as the Lake Forest Association is not applicable to this application. Is that correct, Joanna?
The Lake Forest adopted neighborhood plan is not applicable because this is not a conditional use, not a zone change, not anything that's like a major development where the comprehensive plan, which includes the adopted neighborhood plans, come into play. Likewise with the Clackamas County intergovernmental agreement, all of those policy documents, planning documents that were referenced in that letter from the Lake Forest Neighborhood Association. The memo that I sent out last week basically clarifies that there are set applicable standards, those listed in the beginning pages of the staff report, and those are the only ones that are triggered by this type of land use application. So those are the ones before you. the policy documents that were referenced are what guide our adopted codes, the utility codes, the plumbing code, the tree removal or tree code, the community development code. So those guide what the actual regulations are. Does that answer your question?
Randy, I apologize for butting in.
Oh, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I did have a question specifically related to this application for you, Johanna. I had a note at the end that at the end of the hearing last time in rebuttal, the applicant had stated it intended to place additional trees beyond the required mitigation trees on Cruise Oaks 5. And
Oh, no.
I was going to ask you for clarification on this. And in
Yeah, no,
addition,
they're not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, this is what I had noted, and I wanted to ask for clarification. What, if any, additional landscaping or mitigation trees did the applicant indicate it would add, if any, to buffer? I think it's on the south side between the residential and development that's proposed.
So the applicant is proposing 138 mitigation trees. They updated their landscape plan. That's the last page of the new E exhibit, E33. They're putting additional trees in the Carter Creek area near or directly abutting the low density residential neighborhoods. They're not going above and beyond the minimum mitigation trees. They are adding trees to that area, but they're not going above and beyond.
Oh, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. Mark, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Hey, Joanna, I got your email this afternoon. Thanks. Got a question. I'm going to follow that up regarding the parking. So the city allowed us, there was a study that was done, and I guess I just want to understand, is it the choice of the applicant that they get to choose a study over the metrics that I referred to in my email that actually are pretty good that the city has, but the study was done as a preferred choice. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I did said in the email. Oh, there's a lot of feedback.
You're all right.
The feedback coming through?
You're all right.
Okay. As I said in my email, and I copied and pasted that section of the staff report, the applicant absolutely does have a choice between either using the numerical method, that table, which has listed uses and prescribed number of parking spaces per usually 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, or they can use a parking study. It is completely up to the applicant which method they choose, straight up pure and objective with numbers only, or a parking study. The parking study is also based on numbers, but it's more contextual. It's specific to the proposed use, the neighborhood that it's within, the traffic systems around it, the transit around it. It's much more nuanced and not quite as clear and objective. But the applicant made that choice to use the parking study to determine the minimum parking requirement and the use of the shared parking with Cruise Oaks 3. And that was absolutely a choice. And staff looked at it, reviewed it. The city's traffic engineer also looked at it. We didn't have any issues with that study. We felt that it did comply with the criteria, and they are proposing the correct number of parking spaces.
And so there's no like reasonableness test. If you took this numerical standard that we have, which would actually add quite a few more, there's no reasonableness test. It's you basically what you're saying, you look at it and you're bless their numbers. And
well, it's proposed by a traffic engineer, so it's not something that, say, a sculptor would generate. You actually have to have professional training, and they use the ITE, the trip manual, which is updated every single year, which is also based on actual real life scenarios. Looks like Evan Boone wants to say something.
Well, I was just raising I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Evan.
The question, once an applicant decides to go the parking study route, then it's the applicant's burden to prove what the outcome of that study is. So the applicant has the initial burden to prove. If any other evidence is introduced, then the commission would weigh the evidence on the parking studies. You might have conflicting parking studies. You'd have to determine which one is, if you will, more credible. If there's not another parking study, then that's the only evidence you have. It would be the applicant's parking study. So now, if there's evidence in the record that raises reasonable question as to the credibility of the parking study, then I think you take that into account to determine whether or not whether the applicant met his burden of submitting a credible parking study. But if the lack of that evidence, then you would just take the applicant's evidence. When you weigh that, of course, you would weigh, when you're weighing the evidence, if you look at the professional qualifications of the various reports that are submitted. So if you have a professional engineer, you would probably give that more weight than you would somebody who doesn't have those professional qualifications.
Thanks, Evan. I appreciate that. That's it. That's all I
Okay.
have.
Thanks, Craig. David, we're going to leave you for last. I'll ask my one question. I have a request, guys. Just let's mute when you're not talking and see if we can keep the feedback down. I'm not sure, Johanna, if you want to answer this or if you want Will to, but in looking at the memo, the one thing that kind of stuck in my mind is they're talking about 3,800 daily trips, and they're talking about 564 in the morning, 529 in the afternoon. The numbers just don't, they don't seem to make sense to me, because, most people leave in the morning and they're gone at work, wherever they're going, and then they come back in the afternoon. It just seems like, how many trips do they have? A little over 1,000 or 1,100. It just doesn't seem like enough trips for the number of units. And I know Johanna, maybe Will wants to take this on.
Well, I want to start off by saying that the development agreement that Shorenstein has with the city of Lake Oswego absolutely vests them for 3,800 and I believe 64 trips altogether for the 4 properties that were going to be developed as office uses. We have 3 that are office uses. We have the 4th one that's vacant. They're proposing mixed use on it. They had Kittleson do the trip generation memo based on the city engineer and the city's feedback on how to set that up. There was some discussion about it. And what they found was that not the mixed use, I'm sorry, I should have said multifamily use only generates a few more daily trips and fewer PM peak trips and AM peak trips as well. So the original traffic analysis came from 1999, I believe, and that was done in the county. But again, that is part of the development agreement that is between Shorenstein and the city of Lake Oswego. So staff does not have the capacity to go back and question that number now. That's said and done. What we have to question with this application is whether or not the change in use from office to multifamily generates more trips at a level that would trigger a traffic study. And we found that it doesn't. So any more than that, I would say I would have Will Farley talk to you.
Okay. So what you're saying, though, is the trips, if I'm reading this right, is for Cruise Woods 1 and 4. Is that right on your memo? Or is it 1 through 4?
Cruise Oaks 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all office uses. That's what was approved in the county prior to annexation. Cruise Oaks 1, 2, and 3 are developed as office spaces. Cruise Oaks 4, the site of this application, is vacant. So the trip generation memo looked at the number of trips that were vested with the office uses And then they compared, and so they have the total 3,864. They have
Yep.
the 3 office buildings generating a certain number of trips. Then from there, there's what number of trips were left over in that vested number. And they came, and I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, so hopefully you have that in front of you with the memo that I sent out last week.
Yeah, I'm looking right at it.
What they then did is they said, okay, if Cruise Oaks 4 is office, there's no traffic study, there's no land use application, it's just a straight building permit, they could build the office building.
Right.
But if it's multifamily, okay, well, how many trips are left over? Does multifamily generate more trips than what's left over? Did they go above what they were vested? If they did, how much above did they go? If they hit 250 trips or more a day over the vested amount, then it would have required a new traffic study where they would have looked at the impacts on the traffic system and seen if there was any mitigation necessary. But it didn't. It only hit 181 trips as multifamily versus office. So it didn't hit that trigger on the daily trips. And the next aspect of it, the next regulation that governs whether or not a traffic study or something like that would be required is the peak PM trips. If they're more than 25 peak PM trips, then it would trigger a traffic study. But as you can see from the comparison between office and residential, there are actually fewer AM and PM peak trips generated with multifamily versus office. So in no way, according to the Kittleson study, did this use trigger a traffic study.
I understand what you're saying, but I just don't get that. You got 160 units and you're saying there is 58 AM trips.
58 fewer.
58 fewer. That's what you're saying?
That's what they're saying. Yes. I didn't write that. I'm not a traffic engineer.
Hey, Jeff.
What they're saying is multifamily absolutely generates AM and PM trips. They're saying it generates 50, whatever the numbers are, 58 and 52 fewer AM and PM peak trips.
Yeah, David?
Well, there's a qualitative way to explain it that, if you were in an office, most people go home at 5 o'clock at night.
Right.
So there's a consistent surge in and surge out, right? But if you're at your home, it doesn't happen that way. There's a wider spread of the trips are distributed. That's why the multifamily has got less PM peak hour trips than what you'd experience in an office.
Okay.
So
I mean, in my neighborhood, people leave from 6 to 9.
Right.
They're coming home from 3 till 7.
Right. But
I think it's important to let Will, you're on mute, so we can't hear you. But I think it's important to have our traffic engineer actually speak to this because he's going to be able to explain it a lot better, actually being a professional in this.
Sorry, I was speaking with my hands in the background. I wasn't really talking. But so an apartment generates, so I've got the numbers beside me, and they're saying that if the building was an office, it would be 50 or 114 AM trips in the morning in 1 hour, or 111 PM trips in 1 hour. So that's between the hours of 7 and 9, sometime 1 hour period between 7 and 9 and 4 and 6 PM is what both of these are comparing. So offices generate a lot of trips of people coming into work, getting there by 8 AM, plus you have your morning deliveries, all your services that are happening in those hours. Apartments generally have a lower trip rate because it's a lot of people in apartment use mass transit. There's not the heavy deliveries that are occurring at apartments that happen at offices. You don't have paper delivery or something. So there is a really different source of traffic for each of these uses. Their numbers show that the apartments will generate 56 fewer morning trips and 41 fewer PM trips than if that lot was used by an office building that they had originally planned for.
Okay. All right. I just had a hard time getting my head around that, but if that's what you say, I'm good with it. Okay. David, questions?
No, I really, I have too many opinions and no real questions, so I think I'll probably just save all my comments to the deliberation. I guess the only thing I want to bring up that has been kind of the elephant in the room for me has been this, the fact that we're building this multifamily building next to a unincorporated part of Clackamas County. And if you, I'm looking at the applicant's rebuttal letter, and they go through the fact that the code is specific, that says there's a height reduction requirement if you are next to properties that are zoned R7.5, R10, R15, and that they're within 120 feet of that, of the CR and D zone, which we are. But they said, you know, and it's very specific about that, and the criteria is not ambiguous in any way. And then, you know, then the rebuttal letter goes on to say that, you know, the unincorporated property is zone R8.5, and if it were to be annexed and zoned, it probably would end up as a 7.5. But they say, but regardless of all that, and regardless of the fact that the zoning that exists today, or the zoning that would probably be in place in the future upon annexation, it still does not match that specific R7.5, R10, or R15 to qualify for that height reduction. And, you know, I understand the argument, and really what bothers me is that it's such a quantitative argument that says if you don't meet these specific criteria, then you don't have to comply. But in my mind and in my heart, and sitting in the shoes of the neighbors next door, the truth of the matter is that, you know, the reason why they listed R7.5, R10, and R15, which is the vast majority of the residential single-family zoning in the whole Lake Oswego, is because they didn't want somebody building a big, huge building next to them. That was the intent of it, and the intent is going to be consistent.
You have a question for staff before we get to deliberations?
Well, do I really have to stick with the quantitative analysis here? And can't we go with the intent of the code that says, you know, it was intended to have a lower height because it's next to a residential neighborhood?
So I think that question is pretty easy to answer. And I think you kind of answered it yourself in your question. There is no objectivity in this one. It is clear and objective. It states R7.5, R10, and R15. There's no way to read any ambiguity into that. And that's actually held up by the council. And I do understand what your concern is, but this is all vetted by our council. There's no way to interpret it to include county zoning. There's no way to interpret it to include what a property would be upon annexation. I don't think that there's any wiggle room in that.
No, you know, I know what you're saying, and I probably would agree with Luba. But the truth is that I can't help but feel the intent of this thing. The intent was exactly why they listed those specific ones.
And I think that intent is something that is not something that can be regulated as a part of a land use application. I can absolutely talk to Ellen Davis, our planner who does the annual code amendments, and point this out, point out that maybe this should be brought to the public, brought to the planning commission, to the public for consideration as for a future amendment. But the code as it is now is very clear, and there is no room for interpretation on it as a part of a development application.
I understand. If I was in your position, I would have interpreted the same way, because you don't want to have it appeal. You know,
I don't want to have a what?
You don't want to have it appeal to city council, to Luba. You want to just follow the code as it's written.
Well, that is my job. I am legally obliged to follow the code as it's written.
I think Evan's got a comment.
Yeah, I would just, I guess, echo the analysis. The question for the commission, in order to get to the intent, you have to determine whether there's any ambiguity in the code. So you're looking at the zones that are listed, and the applicant and opponents could bring forth any legislative history that might indicate that there's an ambiguity. As is, the staff has indicated, this issue came up regarding the PD plan development zones, because that had a limitation on minimum setback or minimum lot sizes when next to specific listed zones. And I think it was in 2007 or so that we had the issue came up as to, well, what about if you have lesser density zones next to the PD? Staff interpreted that as applied to city zones. The council upheld that. And so we are following, and we recommend, of course, that the commission follow the council's interpretation of a similar provision. You would have to find, again, ambiguity, and that's brought before you, and then you'd have to look at the legislative history. But if it's not ambiguous, we're left with the text that's in the code. And of course, the commission applies those criteria and standards are listed in the code.
Well, I'll tell you what's unambiguous to me, Evan, is that they didn't want somebody building a big building next to low density residential. That's unambiguous in its intent.
Well, you're going to intent. See, I don't get to.
Well,
the commission doesn't
intent
get to
is
intent.
unambiguous.
Okay.
So if I'm understanding your answer, Evan, the question of the code, the zoning codes being applicable for the unincorporated areas don't apply because we've already dug that trench and the council has decided, correct?
Well,
I would actually, sorry, Evan, can I butt in just a moment? I would say that there are aspects of the code. I think Ms. Krawcheck brought up one, I brought up one where it was obviously the intent of whoever was writing that code to have it apply more generally. And so it just says residential zones. And in that case, we absolutely could and do interpret it to apply to any residential zone, whether it's in the county or in the city. In this case, whoever wrote that code very specifically wrote down city zones. So yeah, I think Evan is on the, or maybe it was your analogy, that trench has been dug by the council and upheld. So that's what staff put in the report.
Evan, is that what you're saying?
Yes, you have to find some ambiguity in order to look at legislative history, and then you have to see what was the intent of the planning commission and city council when it adopted it. And we don't have, I mean, there's no evidence on that point at all, except speculation as to what they would have intended.
But the precedent has been set that
the precedent was set in the PD specific listing, and in fact, in that listing, a code amendment was brought back to make it very clear there that we had already decided it applied to city codes, and so the text was changed to say it applies to city approved R7, 5, 10, and 15. So it was clear in the reading.
Okay, thank you. David, do you have anything else?
Nope.
Okay, gentlemen, any more questions to staff? Anyone? Okay, Evan?
Before you move to deliberation, to the applicant, Dana Krawcheck, or applicant representative, unless waived by the applicant, the commission will allow the applicant at least 7 days after the record is closed to all other parties to submit final written argument in support of the application. This information shall be considered part of the record, but would not include any new evidence. Does the applicant wish to submit final written argument?
This is Dana Krawcheck on behalf of the applicant. No, we do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Commission, you may proceed to deliberation.
Gentlemen? Shall we go around the room, or is there a motion? What are you guys thinking? Kirk, you went first. Kirk, you there?
I think there are commissioners who have issues with the project. So maybe I defer to them before me, because I mean, I'll say is the code's pretty clear and it was written pretty specifically. So as an attorney, I understand the arguments by staff and city attorney. So I mean, it's as if the code's written one way. We don't like the way that it's written, but it is what it is. So, I mean, I'm a stickler for applying the rules, and based on what I've seen, the project complies with the code and that I'm supposed to apply. So I'll let the other commissioners talk, otherwise, I guess.
All right, thanks. Jason, do you have anything?
No, I concur what Commissioner Smith said there too. My thoughts were on the traffic study, the trees, the zoning, and personal feelings aside. I'm listening to what's being said and what was said and what was read, and it's pretty succinct on there. Like or don't like, it's pretty succinct.
Okay. Thank you. Randy?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the other commissioners who've spoken so far. The evidence is, I discern it, shows the application complies with the code. Probably personally, I would have preferred to see development of another office building at this site, but I agree the apartments are a good complementary use in this office building setting. And I think the residential look and exterior articulation of the buildings will fit well in this site. So I'm generally in support of it, and we'll vote in favor of it unless other commissioners raise additional points.
Okay. Mark?
Thank you. No comments and no observations.
Thanks, Mark. Craig?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. Certainly, it's followed the code as written by the city. I've got a lot of empathy for the neighbors in the back there and what could happen to their property value. I have some issues personally with maybe we made some exceptions or that exceptions were made. Other options probably could have been pursued. I think the apartment idea is a great idea in that area of people being, hopefully people will get up and they'll be able to walk across to a building. But I certainly think there are some things that it bothered me the last couple of weeks thinking about those people behind there, but it follows the code. I agreed with what David had said earlier. The parking, I'm a metrics guy. If I do the metrics, it's closer to 250 stalls. I think they'll have a problem later, but the code was followed. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. David?
Well, I know the letter of the law, and I can see how the staff report was written accordingly. But to me, this is, there's one qualitative problem after another with the entire development. Is somebody on non-mute, so feedback is, everybody get your microphones off of you. Okay, anyway, yeah, somebody's still
Craig.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, hold on. My mouse froze up, and I'm gonna add on a mouse onto my laptop here.
Okay. All right.
Much better.
So, let me just go through some of them because I want to at least paint the picture, because it's the only opportunity anybody's ever going to have that looks at it other than city staff to paint this picture. On the one hand, I love the fact that we're having the project because I believe that we need to have, more business to keep the businesses alive in Lake Oswego. So from a business point of view, I like the idea of the project. But let me just run through the things that really bother me. Let's take the traffic study, for example. The Graymore development right across the street here on Cruz and Carmen had to go through a full traffic study because they weren't part of the Shorenstein deal. And that traffic study had to involve that traffic circle, which is right next to it, And of course, it showed that that traffic circle's at level service D already. And that was before the Center Cal Properties mercantile project on the corner of Cruz and Boone's Ferry. That was, and that one, they also looked at it and, you know, no, they didn't study it, I believe. They did not study that traffic circle. So now with this one adding on, it's a certainty that it's going to really probably, I think, take it over the edge from a level of service D to a level of service F, and that traffic circle is going to experience problems. And we have no vehicle for us to do anything to compel a traffic study because they were vested in something that was put together 21 years ago. You know, the world has changed substantially in 21 years, and you know, any development application that's ever approved has an expiration date of only about 6 years. And why is it only 6 years long? Is because the world changes and the public gets another shot after 6 years to look at a development again. But in this case, we made a decision that's lasted for 21 years and it still holds. That's got to be some kind of a failing when it comes to land use planning in my book. Anyway, so that's my qualitative statement on the traffic issue. On the parking issue, a lot of it is the decision to do it, whatever their technique was, involved shared parking with adjacent office uses. And that was only going to work unless Shorenstein was the policeman that made sure that there wasn't a conflict between the residential and the office uses. And you know, with an apartment complex with the dynamic of different types of people moving in and out all the time, it's going to be a never-ending battle to police those shared parking spaces. And I think it's going to degrade the overall quality of how people come to work every day, and or how people want to be able to find a parking space to live. You know, but again, you know, they had a choice, and the code, so they'll meet their, I guess, technically speaking, even though I don't think it's going to operate over time, you know, I think it's going to be a problem, but technically speaking, I guess they meet the parking code. And the other one is the stormwater, where the vast majority of that parking lot is going to be treated by underground stormwater filters. The little rainwater, rain garden planters for the roof are just kind of, you know, window dressing. They don't really treat anything that could be a detriment to water quality. That's going to come from the parking lot, essentially, cars and everything else. And all that water is going to be going through these stormwater filters. And if those filters are not changed on a regular basis, which they never are, and you can guarantee that there's going to be a degradation of water quality inside that creek. And with the creek being this lamprey eel creek, you know, highly sensitive, you know, rare creature down there, you know, I have an issue with it. I would like to have seen a better effort in water quality put into this thing. That's another qualitative issue I have. And then finally, the one is the setback one, which I already went over. You know, I just put myself in the shoes of the people that live in those buildings. Now, I don't know when they bought their buildings relative to, you know, to when the Shorenstein, you know, the office buildings were built. But if I were them, I probably would have thought that, okay, what could happen next door to me before I buy this house? Well, they could put another office building over there. They didn't, or maybe not, were sophisticated enough to get into the code so deeply to understand every element about the code and whether or not there could be some provision where multifamily could go in there, and that what they're going to buy is a house where someone can build an 80-foot tall building where everybody living there can look right down into their backyard. You know, and so that's what we're allowing, because the code is unambiguous in its zoning code, and we're going to allow that to occur. And if you put yourself in the shoes of those property owners, I think you would say, well, there goes my property value. I'll never be able to sell it for what I bought it for, because, you know, no one's going to want to buy a piece of property that's got all that big wall of glass right next to them. That's only, I don't know how far away it is, but it's way less than the 120 feet. So again, I like the project. I like the architecture. I like the way it looks. I think it's fine that we have multifamily mixed in, but those realistic issues are going to make me say I have to vote no on this one. So that's just me. That's all I've got.
Okay. Gentlemen?
I have a question of Dave on this stormwater and the filters. The previous meeting, you said that all the water is flowing towards the project. Like it's like in a bowl and it's going towards the project, and then it goes into what drains and then it's filtered. Is that right, Dave?
Well, the way the grading works on the parking lot is the engineer, and it's just a preliminary grading design. Hopefully they'll do better job on the final design. But the preliminary grading shows a bathtub style of grading. Okay. Where the low spot in the parking lot is a catch basin. And if that catch basin with leaves or whatever were to plug up, it would be a big pond in the middle of the parking lot. And I looked at the way that pond would grow and grow and grow before somebody got out there to clean it out. And it looks like it would go into the building as opposed to going overland flow and run down towards the creek. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking of, but that's one problem I had with it. And the next one is that I was saying that the detention could have gone, all the water could have gone into that pond that's right next to them. And they just had to modify the discharge facility so that it could handle the additional water in that pond. But the applicant said, no, we don't want to deal with the wetlands or the natural resource there. So we'll just bypass that pond. And then so any water quality treatment that pond would provide is not going to be there for this project. It's going to bypass it straight into the discharge pipe coming out of that pond, straight into the creek.
Right, because what I'm, at least from what I'm hearing from the staff, this is my own interpretation, is that I mean, because when I heard staff say, well, there's a development agreement and we're bound by the terms of the development agreement, I'm nonplussed by that because that was for the office buildings. It's a changed use. But then in the next analysis was, well, there's either more trips or less trips. You figure that out, whether or not it's more or less. And it wasn't significant enough to, require a traffic study. And then I'm hearing from, I guess, the staff and city that with respect to this specific of zoning, it says what it says, right? So I guess I'm reading the semaphore flags that the city wants this project, and it follows the code, and I I feel where I feel for the neighbors in as much as where I work is literally right across from apartments, and we see down into these apartments, and the things that we see as an office building is amazing, right? I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, right? So I guess I feel for the neighbors, because there's going to be people in apartments looking down and on these people. I don't know what else to do because the way that the code is written. So it's almost as if we as DRC commissioners, as we say to the community, I'm sorry, our hands are tied. The code says what it says. If the code had been written differently, then maybe we could do something. But our job is to apply the code. And unfortunately, the way the code is, and I'm reading the semaphore flags, project complies, and staff in the city's telling us it complies. You know, if you, unless you see something differently, you should approve it. So.
Well, I agree with you. It's just that, you know, I think maybe if there was someone who wanted to take it higher, that there may be more better legal minds than mine that can make a better legal argument using, you know, my criteria or better criteria. I'm just saying that from my perspective, this is a casualty of the code where certain things are going on that are not appreciated, and I for one recognize that. And you know, let's let better brains than me, and that's why I'm voting no, take it another level. You know, but you know, I won't go there, but you know, I have to get on the record of how I feel about it. I'm just being honest. And back to the traffic study, I know what you're saying about the, you know, the trips from the multifamily versus the office are about the same. That's not the point, though. The point is that the world has changed around it. You got this retail center that went in across the street that was never envisioned. And you've got a huge retail and a multifamily thing right down the street that's going to access the same intersection. And now with our new multifamily, you know, I would think that a traffic study, it's common sense. We should look at it and see what it does. Common sense.
Well, right, because what I'm hearing is that what I'm hearing is if it was concern of the city and the staff, then they would have said, you know what, those additional trips are significant, and we want a traffic study. That's not what we heard, right? I mean, so
they're just doing their job, Kirk.
Well, I mean, you guys.
I'm not beating up on staff or anything else. I'm just saying. I'm saying is if staff and the city said it was significant, they would have said, you know what, we looked at it and that was 20 years ago and things have changed and the area is different and we do think those additional trips are significant. We want a traffic study, but that's not what we heard though, right?
Well, they weren't able to say that because they got a traffic engineer that said, you know, came in, did this traffic study and said the trips weren't significant. It didn't trigger a traffic study.
No, but the city has its own traffic person. I mean,
well, yeah, but Will looked at it and said it didn't trigger it, and they had their own engineer, an outside engineer that looked at it and said it didn't trigger a traffic study. That doesn't mean that the overall use of Cruz Way and Meadows since the agreement was made 20 years ago shouldn't trip a traffic study somewhere. I mean, those poor people on Quarry and Bonita and all those roads down there are just getting hammered with people trying to get into Lake Oswego. So overall, there should be a traffic study and some design to alleviate traffic for that area.
Well, but the
Carmen and all that. But
all the traffic engineer did, Jeff, was to say that they exceeded or didn't exceed the vested amount of trips that was per the Shorenstein agreement.
Right.
That's it. But they didn't, they weren't, it wasn't even their job. After that, it's not even their job to look at the larger traffic condition.
Well, no, they met the test, but the issue that you're having is when they did the extension, and I think there's been 3 or 4 extensions of the Shorenstein agreement, they should have asked them, you know, the city should have said then, hey, let's take a look at the traffic and figure out what's going on.
Should have.
You know, and we're not privy to that negotiation, how that went or anything else, but that's when it should have happened, when they did the extension and said, okay, yeah, but if you want another 5-year extension, you need to do a traffic study for the overall impact of this development on the Lake Grove area. Yep. And that wasn't done. So
I understand, but
we're kind of stuck where we are.
I know, but I'm weighing that issue with pain and suffering all the people that live here and go to work here.
Yeah.
I got a question. Maybe this is for Evan. You know, we're here as oversight. If we feel that as oversight that there were decisions on exceptions that we disagree with, and we feel that the applicant should look at, and I know they said they've had 3 alternative buildings and we say, well, they need to look at it again. Does this commission have the right to do that?
Well, when you say oversight, I'm not sure I follow. Your job is to determine whether this application meets the criteria. If you're referring to the tree removal criteria exception 3, criteria 3 exception B, whether reasonable alternatives are considered, we need to, staff can certainly address that directly. But I'm not sure what you mean by oversight of an application.
Well, so exactly, you hit the trees. That's where one of the ones I was getting at.
Okay. Well, then the applicant has introduced evidence as to what reasonable alternatives they looked at. Staff has made their analysis. You've also heard comments about what other opportunities are available. It's up to the commission to decide whether reasonable opportunities for development were considered, which would allow the same, or which would allow the level of development that's permitted in that zone. I mean, it is not. This commission is held on other tree removal applications, and the city council has affirmed it is not for us to reduce the level of development in order to save a tree. The applicant gets to develop to the extent they're permitted under the code, unless there's some other reasonable development, reasonable opportunities for development that can be made to give them the same level of development. If you catch me.
Craig, our job is to take a look and see, did the city do their job following the code, and were they reasonable? Did they follow the rules?
Yeah,
for
did
this
the
application?
applicant do the job? Did the applicant do the job?
The applicant do the job, and then when the city looked at it, do they agree? And if they did, then we should vote for the project. If we feel they didn't, then we shouldn't.
And they, by that, Mr. Chair, you're meaning the applicant. It's not a question of whether the city agrees with the applicant or not. That's kind of irrelevant. We provide an independent analysis to the commission, and you take that into consideration. But the ultimate question is what evidence you have before you, both pro and con, from the applicant and others, as to whether it meets the criteria.
Thanks.
Guys, anything else? Is there a motion? Okay, no motion. So what's your pleasure, gentlemen?
I'm actually going to move to approve LU 19-0041, the Shorenstein 5600 Meadows Road project for approval as recommended by city.
Is there a second?
Motion.
Randy, do you second? Okay, Kat, could you is there any discussion?
Sorry to butt in. I just want to make sure that you're capturing the modifications to condition A3 for the update for the exhibit and getting rid of that one A3D in the motion.
I didn't quite catch what you said. Could you say it again?
Oh, I'm sorry. So in the staff memo from last week, I did recommend that change to condition A3 to capture the 2 new e-exhibits and to delete 3D and renumber it. So if you look at the, I don't want to test anything by trying to share my screen because I think I would probably be banished into outer space forever for doing that. But hopefully it's clear.
Okay, so let me make sure we got it.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to amend the motion to be it conditioned, including A3 as addendum, and it also adds addendum 2E, and it will delete 3D.
Yeah, so it'll be 3A is amended to include the new. I mean, basically, I guess the motion could just say as amended in staff's 7/1/20 DRC memo.
Okay.
That would, hopefully, Evan, you would say that would work.
Absolutely.
So I will go ahead and make that revision to moving to approve LU 19-0044 with the amended changes
Excuse
on
me,
the
4-1. 4-1.
Yep, sorry. Getting all my papers mixed up. LU 19-0041, the Shorenstein project, approve with the amended, based on the amended memo 7-1 dated 7/1/20 by staff.
And I second that motion as amended.
Okay, so moved. No comments. If there are no comments, we move to a vote.
Sheard,
Yes.
Olson,
No.
Berardi,
No.
Smith,
Yes.
Frankel,
Yes.
Silent,
Yes.
Arthur,
Yes.
What's the tally? Did I lose everybody?
5 approve, 2 deny.
Okay. So
This is it.
the motion is passed. Evan?
Yeah, this is a tentative decision of the commission and written findings we brought back to the commission at the next meeting on July 20th. Jessica, let me just interrupt. Is there any, are we at 7 o'clock or is there any chance earlier?
Well, it depends on if the hearing tonight is continued. If the hearing is continued, then we would normally, then we would meet at 7. And if it wasn't, then we'd normally ask the commission to meet at 6. But since we're meeting virtually, maybe it's not a big deal to meet at 7 either way.
What day would that be?
July 20th is a Monday.
2 weeks.
Okay. Gentlemen, do you have a problem meeting? Does 6 work better than 7, or would you rather be 7?
Well, why don't we?
Don't we need to wait for the second one?
Yeah, why don't we'll just say it's continued to the next meeting on July the 20th and the exact time will be posted.
Very good.
We'll determine
Thank
at
you.
the end.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks, Johanna. Okay, next order of business, we will move to LU 19-0044. This is a request for a 10-lot subdivision with planned development overlay and the removal of 152 trees for construction of site improvements. The site is an unaddressed vacant lot located on the east side of Waluga Drive. Map and tax lot references 21E07 AD 02800 and 21E07 AD 02802. The staff coordinator is Evan Franstead, associate planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before the staff report, the procedure is as follows. This land use request is considered based on the applicable criteria and standards. The staff report lists the criteria and standards identified by staff, which has been available upon request and is available online. You must identify any additional criteria you believe applies. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable criteria. Please specifically identify to the commission the criteria or standards you are addressing so the commission may consider your testimony in relation to the criteria or standards that you are addressing. If you do not identify the criteria or standards that you're addressing, the commission is not obliged to guess which standards or criteria you are testifying about and may not consider your testimony in this decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the City Council and the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. The failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with specificity to allow the commission to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. The public hearing process is as follows. First, there'll be a presentation by staff, then testimony by the applicant up to 20 minutes, then testimony by parties in support of the application, followed by testimony by parties opposed to the application, and finally testimony by those neither for nor against the application. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes, and any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person except to the applicant, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government or government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. Following that would be the applicant's rebuttal up to 5 minutes, and then commission deliberation, including a statement to the applicant by the commission of any proposed conditions of approval different than contained in the staff report, and the applicant's response to the commission's conditions of approval proposed following commission deliberation. Following testimony by all interested persons that have signed up to speak in the applicant's rebuttal, I will ask whether any person requests a continuance of the hearing in order to submit any additional evidence or testimony. You may request a continuance by, if you are on WebEx and testifying, then either at the end of your testimony or requesting it at the conclusion of all testimony when I ask if anybody requests a continuance. At that point, unmute and request a continuance. Or if you're not on WebEx, because you're watching on YouTube, call Kat Klug at 503-635-0286. Again, 503-635-0286. Leave your name and contact information with our secretary. Or finally, email Kat Kluge, that's KKLUGE at lakeoswego.city. That's KKLUGE at lakeoswego.city with your name and contact information, and indicate you're requesting continuance of the public hearing. These time limits, which I indicated above, do not include time spent responding to questions from the commission. Testimony by attorneys, representatives, and witnesses on behalf of, or which are part of the presentation by a person, shall be counted within that person's time limit. It's assumed that persons are testifying on their own behalf unless they expressly identify the recognized neighborhood association, homeowner association, government or government agency, or other incorporated public interest organization they are representing. I now ask a potential conflict of interest is declared on behalf of each of the DRC members to the extent of their business or employment, which each will identify. Unless declared otherwise, the respective DRC member does not have a known present or anticipated future business relationship with the project or the applicant. It is possible that a future business relationship could arise in the initiation, design, construction, or maintenance of the project through either the employment of the employment or business of a DRC member personally, or through a relative as defined in ORS 244-020. At this point, I would ask the commission members to please declare if you've had any ex parte contacts, including a site visit, if you're biased on the application, any financial conflict of interest, and please state your business or employment. Whoever you want to start with, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'll go first, but before I do that, Kat, do you have a list of people who want to testify?
I do not have anyone signed up.
Okay, thank you. I declare that I have no conflict of interest, no ex parte contact, no bias, and no financial conflict. My name is Jeff Shear. I'm a retired contractor and a resident of Lake Oswego since 1968.
Did you make a site visit?
No site visit. Thank you. Kirk.
My name is Kirk Smith. I'm an attorney with Buckhalter Wynn. I've not visited the site, no ex parte contacts, no bias, no additional financial conflicts of interest.
Thanks, Kirk. Jason.
Jason Frankel, bank manager here in downtown Lake Oswego at KeyBank, longtime Lake Oswego resident. I have not done a site visit, no ex parte contact, no financial conflict of interest or any bias.
Thank you. Randy.
I'm Randy Arthur. I'm an attorney with the Bullivan Bailey law firm in Portland. I did cause a conflicts check to be run on certain names that were given to me by staff. No conflicts of interest with our firm's clients, and the applicant and their advisors came forward. I did formally serve with Todd Prager on the Planning Commission. He, I think, has written a report for the arborist report in this matter. I did not make a site visit. I have no financial interest or conflict of interest or disqualifying bias.
Thank you, Randy. Mark.
My name's Mark Silon. I'm a retired surgeon. No ex parte contacts, no financial conflicts of interest, no site visit.
Thank you. Craig.
Craig Berardi, consultant. I have not visited the site. No ex parte contacts, no bias, no financial conflicts.
Thank you. David.
My name's David Polson. I'm a civil engineer. I did make a site visit. I walked my dog up and down that trail at the bottom of the property, and I walked up to that little what is it, that dirt bike obstacle course they've got up there, which is kind of cool. So I am familiar with the site. I have no biases. I have no financial conflicts of interest, and I have no ex parte contact.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Is there any challenge to commissioners' right to consider the application? Hearing none, Associate Planner Evan Franstead with the staff report.
Mr. Broom and members of the commission. For the record, my name is Evan Franstead. I'm Associate Planner, and I will attempt to share my screen now. All right, hold on, bear with me here. Trying to move out the screens. There we go. Okay, so can everybody hear me okay? And see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so the file number is LU1944. The site is on Waluga Drive. It's in the Lake Forest neighborhood. Waluga neighborhood is to the west across Waluga Drive. The site is zoned R7.5. The abutting properties to the north are also zoned R7.5. The site is surrounded to the east, west, and south with Waluga Park. It is a vacant property. There's 2 tax lots. The site is steeply sloped. If anybody's been out there, you'll know that. It's approximately 25% going from the northeast corner to the southwest corner. There are 263 trees on the site or in the budding right-of-way. There is sensitive lands on this property. There's habitat benefit area, which is a voluntary program that the applicant chose not to participate in. So that's all I'll mention that. Overall project description, it's a 10-lot subdivision with a planned development overlay. They're proposing to remove 152 trees for construction site improvements. We did receive one public comment today that you should have received via email. It is from Cheryl Uchia, and she states that she's neutral to this application, neither for nor against. Here's a preliminary plat. So as I mentioned, it's 10 lots. They have 2 open space tracks. Track B here is 28,241 square feet, and track A is 1,583. Just general description here, the new street A, comes up here basically to the midpoint of the site. There's a fire turnaround right here in lot 3, basically. They're proposing a stormwater facility easements along the south of lots 6 through 10, and there'll be a conservation area right here that's voluntary. The grading plan, because the site is so steep, they're grading most of the site. In order to put in the street to acceptable levels of slope and to allow for development of the site. So these are building envelopes for 6 through 10. They're stopping the grading towards the front yard of lots 1 through 5. Previously, they had proposed to grade the whole site. They changed that to save more trees. So they're no longer grading these northern areas of lots 1 through 5. utility plan here shows that they'll have utilities in the streets, sewer, water. The stormwater drains down here to the south. And we have our stormwater consultant here if you have questions about that. Open space and landscaping. So that open space tract B, that's 22,241 square feet, is going to be dedicated to the city and be incorporated into Aluga Park. Parks Department says that they would love to take it on. There's no exact plans for what to do with it yet. That would allow for 30.9% of net buildable area to be open space. And there'll be street trees required along all fronts of the lots. That's condition A10. I'll talk more about that. Here's the street plan. So right now they're showing street trees along the front yards of lots 6 through 10, but not along in front of lots 1 through 5. So the condition would require street trees be planted in front of each lot, depending on what type of tree they select, which they haven't shown us what type they plan on. But we can do that later with the conditions as part of the plating process and building permits. They're showing parking spaces here. So each one of these is a parking space. There's 7 of those. And I can answer any questions after this about any more details, really. And they are requesting exceptions to PD standards to our 7.5 dimensional standards. The first one is to lot 3. The lot area is less than 7,500 square feet, which is required. It's 7,406. They're also requesting exceptions to the front yard setback. They change it to 5 feet here. The street side setback on lot 3 to 5 feet. The street side setback for lot 2 to 5 feet. And the rear setback of lot 5 on this section to 15 feet instead of the required 30. Overall, staff found that, I mean, there's a lot more in the staff report. I'm going to be brief, but that the applicant is proposing more open space than they're required at 30.9%. All the lots meet the perimeter yard setbacks to north and west. The reduced lot size of lot 3 is in keeping with the pattern of the development of the vicinity. Overall, we found that the criteria for the PD exceptions were met. And I can go into more detail about that too, if you would like. And here's all the exceptions I listed.
Thank you, Evan. Any questions, guys?
I have some.
Go ahead.
So Evan, the lot area shown on 2, 3, 4, and 5, if those are built in there and up to the footprint that's shown dashed lines there, will more trees be taken out for those?
That's not what they're showing. I can go to the tree removal plan, which doesn't show the dashed lines, unfortunately.
Well, if you went to the grading plan, you'd probably see where the...
Yeah, so there's that too. Here's the tree removal plan. You see these are trees that are going to be preserved or retained.
But like that one on lot 4 or 5, that's not going to go down as far as the...
That's not what they're proposing for this, but if they have to apply for it later as part of the building permit, then we'll review at that time.
That was really the intent of my question, was whether or not what they're proposing for tree removal is just to create the lot grading that they've got, but
right,
not account for the ultimate individual lot development that will happen in the future.
Yes, that's probably true. I mean, as each building permit comes in to that specific plan, there might need to be further tree removal. This is like developed. I can go back to the grading plan.
And I will just add that that's true with any land division application. We do not allow them to apply for or request tree removal for future house construction, because we want it based on the actual plan that they're going to propose, because they may not need to take out all the trees that they're asking for in order to build a house, because you're not going to fill necessarily the entire potential building envelope. So So this is typical of a subdivision or partition where we would not want them to request the tree removal now for future house construction until we know the actual plans.
Okay, that's answers my question.
Okay.
And then I noticed that they are using a shed section for the roadway. If you know what I mean by that, doesn't have a crown in it. So all the stormwater that falls on the street are now going to end up on the south curb. And there's a section that you showed back there, showed the roadway section on one of your previous slides there at the bottom there. See, it's a shed section. So all the stormwater that's going to run off of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are they going to have to apply for individual stormwater detention for that? Or is it planned the sheet flow off the lots over the street and into the gutter on the south gutter, and then into the 2 catch basins they're showing? Is that their plan? Or is there individual detention on each one?
I believe, and we can let our stormwater consultant talk about this, but this plan shows only for the construction of the street, and stormwater for that doesn't show for each house.
So this is Jessica Christopherson with Brown and Caldwell. So they have, in their detention calculations, they made a guesstimate of how much new impervious area would be on each of the lots, and it was about 52,355 square feet of new impervious area, and about 44,000 square feet of pervious area that will be treated and detained in the surface swale and in the underground detention pipe system.
Okay, so their intent was to not do individual stormwater detention or treatment on each lot. It was all handled in this new public facility.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so that means that the water that's going to be delivered from each one of those northern lots really will just sheet flow off over this road and into the gutter on the south gutter.
Yes, that is
I got
correct.
that right?
Yep, that's the way it appears in the stormwater report.
Did anybody look at how that, because that's a pretty steep street. Should we be concerned about, water getting by that upper catch basin? And, I'm just worried there's a lot of water crossing that street and down that gutter. If that catch basin fails, then there's going to be a problem going down the street, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We don't look at conveyance capacity in our land use reviews for the pipe system, so I don't know if the applicant's here to speak to the design of that or not, but.
Okay. We'll ask him at the time.
Okay, sounds good.
And then the other big concern I've got, and I don't think, I'm sorry, this is a typical subdivision, so this is more of a technical review, and I know I'm crossing the line between land use review and engineering review, but I am concerned, and I hope others are as well, about the fills that are going on this site. It's a real steep site to begin with, and can somebody flip to the grading plan so I can kind of talk my way through it and show the question I'm going to ask?
Yes, I'm trying to here.
Excuse me. That's an interesting old
There we
tree.
go. Okay.
There. Okay, so down on the south end, at the back end of 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, they're filling those properties to bring them up so they're more level with the roadway. And then they're having what I call a sliver fill, that is a real steep 2-to-1 fill that's trying to catch an already 25% natural grade. And they're trying to tie those in. And that's a very dangerous thing normally. And that's why the geotech report went through some trouble to talk about how that fill is going to be installed. But I'm still not quite satisfied with what I read in the geotechnical report, primarily because it was 14 years old and looked at a different subdivision. That one had 11 lots, and I had no idea what that configuration even looked like. So I've got a problem with how the fill will be put in. I'm just not satisfied with it. It scares me, especially when all the water is flowing down, maybe across the street and into those southern lots, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, could saturate those soils, saturate that fill. And to make matters worse, we're putting a bioswale at the toe of the slope that's going to inject a whole bunch of other water possibly into the toe that could destabilize that geotechnical environment. So, and bottom is, does anybody look at this specific development with a current geotechnical engineer? That's my question.
Well, we looked at it for the steep slope standards, and we have a condition in there that requires a final geotechnical report for each lot based on the proposed grading.
But there's been no, current geotech looking at it relative to this development.
Do you mean on staff? Do we have our own geotech looking at it?
Or the applicants had one, or?
Well, what they submitted is all they have for now, and maybe this is a better question for them.
Okay. And yeah, plus the fact that they're test pits, they only did test pits out there instead of boring. So I really don't know what, the maximum test pit depth was only 12 feet. And I think we're deeper than that in terms of how this fill is going in. And I just count the contour lines and you see more than 12 there. So it's,
yeah,
anyway.
so it's more than 12 feet of fill at one point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, I'll save my questions for the applicant, but that's kind of all I had. Oh, one other thing, Evan, the site distances, I saw the diagram they have and it looks okay, but this is one of those configurations where, you're coming into a street where the street's kind of wrapping backwards instead of, so you're, it's kind of the wrong situation for site distance, if you know what I'm saying. You're coming into the back of a curve as opposed to the apex of a curve.
We can have our traffic engineer talk to that if you would like.
Yeah, because I'm worried about, things getting in the way, growing in the way, vegetation that get in the way that would cause a safety problem there, because that street is kind of steep and people come down there pretty fast.
Sure. Chris, are you in line?
Their traffic engineer or me?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, you.
The applicant actually submitted a traffic engineer's report on site distance and found that both directions would be adequate when they were proposing their access at, looking both north to and the south.
And that didn't depend upon looking through the right of way at all. I guess I'd have to see it, look at it, but I'm worried about plants growing up and getting in the way on that one. Theoretically, I know that you made it because I saw it, but.
Yeah, I'm looking back over it right now, and they did say that provided any obstructing on-site foliage is removed and the proposed access approach is constructed reasonably level to the intersecting street, no other obstructions were noted that would limit site distance less than what was measured in the field.
So
they're counting on the vegetation on the property to be removed to get adequate site distance.
I see. Okay, and maintain that way in perpetuity.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And how's that going to be done? Is there an HOA here, or is this a public thing?
That would probably be best asked to the applicant. From what the plans look like, they're doing some improvements along the frontage, which I would assume remove tall vegetations.
Okay. It sounds like it's a public responsibility. Yeah, that's all the questions I have.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I still have some of my presentation left.
Oh, okay. I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
No problem. I asked. It's probably better this way anyway, as it's fresh as I'm going through the slides. So we talked about the exceptions.
Hold it right there, and then I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
So track B, are they grading that?
No, only the beginning of it, but no, they're not. That's the,
So they're not taking any trees out of there either, right?
no, they're not. It's close, but no.
I thought I saw, I can't really see off the drawing, but it
Well,
looks
there
like.
is one right here, yeah, 731. They'd be taken out. That's for grading.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Here's a tree removal plan. It shows all those trees for grading. They submitted 2 alternative plans that show different configurations to try to ascertain if there's different ways to configure these lots to save more trees. And this is one of those plans that shows more of a north-south direction in the street. And then number 2 has this dual hammerhead with 11 lots. So the removal is for development purposes, including grading, which is mostly what it is for the grading of the site, put in the streets and utilities, including there's a retaining wall. Staff found that all 152 trees are significant because they'd have a significant negative impact to the neighborhood. Those alternatives were considered, looked closely at if there was any way to reconfigure that street mostly. Could you put it to the south? Could you put it somewhere else to save more trees? And conclusion was that there's no reasonable alternative given the steep configuration of this site and allow density, that there really was no alternative to removing those trees. And finally, recommendation is approval as conditioned in the staff report. I can answer any other questions at this time.
Gentlemen, you have any questions of staff? Okay. We would then invite the applicant to make their testimony.
Good evening, Chair Shearer. I hope you can hear me. This is Ken Sandblast from Westlake Consultants. First of all, I should confirm you can hear me.
How are you?
Good. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm here in my conference room at my office, and property owner Gerald Mock is sitting at the far end of the table with me. We're wearing our masks as we're social distancing, but we wanted to be in the same room. So Gerald is here tonight with me, and he is a long-term citizen and property owner in Lake Oswego. He's lived in his house, which is adjacent to the north of the property. It's one of the houses on Park Hill Drive for over 50 years. And he's owned this property that's subject of tonight's hearing for 47 of those 50 plus years. So he has owned this land for an extended period of time. There's been efforts over time in the recent, let's just say 10 or 15 years, looking at the development of it. There's been dialogue with the city about trees and about park and everything else. And what we have in front of you tonight is something I'm going to give a little context to, and then maybe answer some of the questions that have already been brought up. The property, of course, has some topography, as Evan's exhibits showed. We did do a slope analysis. So in the packet, one of the sheets in the plan set is a color, should be a colored version of the slopes. And if you look closely at that, what you'll see is that the developed area of the site, I'll just say kind of the western half of it, are the lower, less slopes. They're pretty much predominantly under 20%. And then as you move to the east half, and particularly into the southeast part of the property, you get over the 20-25% slopes. So we had to work with that. That was one of our just facts on the ground. The tree inventory was important, so we went out and inventoried all the trees. And of course, yes, we do have an arborist report. Todd Prager's with us tonight if there's individual particular questions, but all of that information is in the file as well. So we looked at the topography, we looked at the trees. Of course, we acknowledged the fact that there's parkland on 3 sides and across the street from the 3rd side of the property. There was a couple of different projects that had been looked at in the past that were much more of an attached townhome kind of a presentation, and that was to find ways to maximize density. This is about 3.5 acres or just under 3.5 acres. And if one chooses to maximize the density, transferring off of open space in a PD and whatnot. There's upwards of 17 or even 18 lots that might be able to be proposed on this property. That was not what we set out to do. We set out to look at trying to minimize the density. And we went extensively over the course of it's taken us about a year to get to this point. And we went in and had to talk and work through with the Parks Department of Lake Oswego, just the whole configuration and location and amount, quantity of land that would be potential that would be accepted by the public as an expansion of the park. So what you see in front of you is something that has been reviewed and vetted out with regards to its location and kind of how it amends and expands. In fact, Commissioner Polson, as he walked through there with his dog, and I did the same with mine, yeah, that is the part of the property that will be an expansion of the park. Because right in the northeast corner of the property, there's already an acre of land that's owned by the city from some time back. So this piece is below that and expands that and kind of finishes off that corner. So as a public dedication, in the way that the density calculations in the code work, we were then able to reduce the density even more, because that allowed us to deduct that entire 29,000 square feet plus or minus and not transfer that density. So that reduced us down to more like 13 units. And then of course, we are proposing 10, and that is the absolute minimum required. We did that because we were trying to be as compatible as we could with the adjacent properties to the north. And as I think Evan touched on in his staff report, these lots, and we say in our materials as well, all of these lots, save one lot, are all greater than 7,500 square feet. One lot is 7,406, which is less than 100 from being compliant. We did a PD because we had to make this fit. It's in a regular shape. We have the parkland that we've are offering for being accepted for dedication. We have to have a public street to get in here. We tried a private street initially. We looked at something like that. We wanted the street to be 32 feet of asphalt so that we had parking on both sides. And as Evan touched on, we've demonstrated that we have some on-street parking because I know that's an issue. We had to have a turnaround, and so that's where you see the PD exceptions. They're really limited to this one lot because of the turnaround. This one lot has a little less square footage, and it needs a couple of adjustments to the setbacks to account for that hammerhead turnaround. So even though this is a planned development, it's about as close to as a straight subdivision in R 7.2